$15,000 Europe trip on my credit card. How my family turned against me. My name is Alex, and I'm 28 years old. I grew up in a middle-class suburb just outside of Denver, Colorado, where my parents still live. I currently work in finance for a regional bank, a job I landed right after graduating college. Ever since I was little, I took responsibility seriously. I studied hard, worked part-time jobs during the summers, and saved most of what I earned. By the time I graduated from college at 22, I was determined never to be financially dependent on anyone. I'm proud to say that I've stayed true to that commitment, paying for my own apartment, car, and day-to-day expenses without leaning on my family. My younger sister, Emma, is 22 and just finished her bachelor's degree at a university in California. From the outside looking in, you might assume we had similar upbringings. But the reality is that Emma's experience was very different from mine. Our parents always had, let's say, unconventional views on how to treat their children, and Emma inevitably wound up getting the lion's share of their attention and resources. Don't get me wrong, I love my sister. She can be bright, funny, and kind. But it's no secret she was given more than her fair share of gifts, new gadgets, and privileges while growing up. If I wanted something, I was expected to either save up for it or figure out how to earn it. Emma's big expenses, on the other hand, were often covered just because. Even when we were kids, the contrast was painfully obvious. One memory that still stings is the summer I was 16, saving diligently to buy a new gaming console. I worked as a lifeguard at a neighborhood pool, stocking away every paycheck. When I finally had enough money, I excitedly announced I was heading to the store. That's when my parents casually mentioned they'd already bought the exact same console for Emma the week before. Their response? You can just play on hers. No need to spend your own money. But of course, that was Emma's console. She never really let me use it unless she felt like sharing. The few times she did, she acted like she was doing me a huge favor. It wasn't just about material things either. Growing up, if chores needed to be done, I was the one expected to mow the lawn, wash the car, or help cook dinner. Emma was free to pursue her social life and hobbies without many expectations. My parents seemed to justify this by saying I was naturally responsible, while Emma was the young one who needed room to explore. Their intentions, I imagine, were to keep her happy and carefree, but it set a very uneven precedent in our household. I tried to keep my head down and focus on my goals, telling myself that any resentment I felt was just me being too sensitive. I truly believed that, by working harder and being more mature, I would earn my parents' respect. But the older I got, the more I realized that their favoritism toward Emma was not just a phase. It was their entire approach to parenting. Still, I did my best to avoid family conflicts, spending most of my time studying or working. Little did I know how much that divide would matter once we both reached adulthood. Everything came to a head just a few months ago, right after Emma's college graduation. I was at home one evening, looking over my credit card statements, when I noticed a jaw-dropping charge of $15,000. My heart started racing. I couldn't imagine what I might have purchased to rack up a balance that high. After double-checking, I realized the charge was for a series of bookings involving airfare and hotel reservations in multiple European cities. Confused, I scrolled through the transactions, each neatly adding up to one grand total of $15,000. That's when a knot formed in my stomach, and I had an uneasy suspicion of exactly who might be responsible. I confronted my parents the next day. My mother shrugged it off at first, almost as if it were no big deal. She said they'd used my credit card information to surprise Emma with a month-long trip around Europe. It was, according to them, the perfect graduation present, something Emma had dreamed of for years. My father chimed in, saying they'd known I'd appreciate the chance to help your sister celebrate this big milestone. I felt my blood pressure spike. Help Emma celebrate? By charging $15,000 to my credit card without even asking? When I pointed out how serious this was, ranging from the illegality of unauthorized card usage to the potential hit on my credit score, they gave me blank stares. It was as if I was speaking a language they'd never heard. We're family, my mother insisted. Money is just money. You know we'll pay it back eventually. My dad added, you're doing so well financially. We didn't think you'd mind. Mind? I was furious. I tried to keep my voice level as I explained the implications. A huge bill I hadn't budgeted for, the risk of interest accruing if they delayed repayment, and above all, the betrayal of trust. Their response flipped from dismissive to offended. Suddenly, I was the bad guy. My mother accused me of being selfish, saying that Emma had worked hard for her degree and deserved a chance to see the world. My father suggested that I'd become too focused on money and was forgetting the importance of family values. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. To make matters worse, Emma herself was totally unaware of the drama unfolding. From her perspective, she saw the extravagant trip as a loving, if somewhat extravagant, graduation gift. She even texted me an enthusiastic thank you, gushing about how I'd always been such a supportive brother. Talk about awkward. Later, I tried talking to Emma directly. I explained that I hadn't even known about the trip until I saw the charges. She looked shocked, but not for the reasons I expected. Instead of acknowledging the wrongdoing, she brushed it off. But you always said you wanted me to travel, right? And Mom said you were fine paying for it. She seemed genuinely puzzled as to why I was upset, almost as if unauthorized credit card usage was just another example of family sharing. I felt like I was in a bizarre alternate reality. My parents kept insisting that I was overreacting, pointing out that we were all related and that my good credit standing made it easy for me to cover the expense for now. Emma continued to express gratitude for a gift I never knowingly gave. No matter how calmly I tried to explain the seriousness of the situation, their collective stance boiled down to this: families should look out for each other, and if I refused, I was the one who lacked compassion. It was infuriating, heartbreaking, and surreal all at once. Determined to rectify the mess, I contacted my bank first, hoping they would recognize this as fraud and cancel the charges. To my dismay, the bank informed me that this case didn't meet their typical definition of fraud. Because I had previously shared my credit card information with my parents, strictly for emergencies, there was no blatant theft in the traditional sense. The customer service representative explained that it would be challenging to classify it as criminal misuse, given the familial relationship and my parents' authorized, if limited, access to the card. My head spun with frustration. It felt grossly unfair that a label like family could shield an obvious violation of trust. Next, I tried reasoning with my parents again. I laid out spreadsheets showing exactly how the unauthorized charges would impact my monthly budget, pointing out the accruing interest if they didn't repay me promptly. But their reaction only deepened the chasm. My mother accused me of being obsessed with money and insisted that if I truly cared about Emma, I'd treat the trip as a heartfelt graduation present. My father took a more defensive stance, remarking that our family had always operated on a "what's mine is yours" philosophy, so he couldn't see why I was so upset. Between the two of them, I felt like I was being labeled a greedy villain rather than someone who'd just been blindsided by a massive bill. Hoping for some sanity, I tried talking to Emma one-on-one. She was surprised to hear I'd gone so far as to involve the bank, but instead of backing me up, she doubled down on the notion that I was ruining her big celebration. According to Emma, she'd put in 4 grueling years of study and felt entitled to a proper graduation send-off. The fact that my finances were on the line didn't faze her. She even implied I might be jealous of her newfound freedom and the attention she was getting. With every conversation, the situation grew more toxic. My parents began implying that I'd forgotten where I came from now that I had a well-paying job in finance. At dinners and family gatherings, they dropped passive-aggressive remarks like, "We always supported Alex, but I guess he can't do the same for us." When I explained, over and over again, that I had never agreed to foot a $15,000 bill, they shook their heads as if I were being unreasonable. I felt betrayed and cornered. Their insistence that my objections amounted to a lack of familial love only intensified the pressure. Realizing I might have to take formal action, I sought advice from a lawyer friend. He informed me that legally, I could file a civil complaint or even go to the police, but it would become messy fast. He also warned that some jurisdictions struggle to pursue such cases when family members are involved. Nevertheless, I filed a report with local authorities, mostly to establish a paper trail. If my parents refused to repay the amount and the bank wouldn't rule it as fraud, I needed to cover my bases. It was during these stressful weeks that I began to see patterns in my family's behavior. A cousin mentioned my parents had, in the past, used another relative's savings account to cover a car payment without asking. An aunt told me they'd borrowed money for medical bills but never repaid her fully. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces clicked into place. This wasn't an isolated incident, but rather a recurring pattern of entitlement disguised as family support. The realization shook me. I felt both anger and sadness. Anger that they had taken advantage of me, and sadness because I now understood how deeply ingrained their habit was. Any hope of a quick resolution started to fade. Instead, I braced myself for an uphill battle, one that would test not only my financial stability but also my emotional resilience, and force me to question how much I could salvage of my relationship with my family. The final tipping point arrived when, after several heated calls and emails back and forth, the bank concluded its investigation. At first, I'd been told that since I'd previously granted my parents limited access to my credit card details for emergencies, there might not be a clear path to labeling their use as outright fraud. However, after reviewing records of my explicit instructions that the card was only for dire circumstances, plus the exorbitant sum and my official objection, the bank reversed course. They decided to classify the spending as unauthorized, thereby canceling the payment in full. The $15,000 bill was removed from my account, and they issued me a new card number to prevent further misuse. Relief rushed over me like a wave. I would no longer be saddled with a debt I never agreed to. But that relief was short-lived once I realized the ripple effect on my family. With the transaction canceled, the travel agency handling Emma's European tour began canceling her reservations, flights, hotels, and special excursions were all voided. My parents saw this as my doing, not the bank's, and immediately placed blame squarely at my feet. I had ruined Emma's dream and sabotaged her big moment. Never mind that this dream was funded by illegitimate means. In their eyes, I was the sole reason the trip fell apart. Word got around quickly within our extended family. One cousin called to say she'd heard Emma crying about having her suitcases packed and itinerary planned, only for the entire adventure to vanish overnight. Another relative mentioned that my parents were leaving angry voicemails on a loop, describing me as an ungrateful child who had betrayed family values for money. My phone lit up with text messages from distant aunts and old family friends, many of whom were sympathetic to my parents' perspective. Can't you just let Emma have this once-in-a-lifetime experience? Is money really more important than your sister's happiness? The implication was clear. I was acting heartless. To make matters worse, Emma took her grievances public. She posted a tearful video on social media accusing me of being a controlling, spiteful brother. She refrained from mentioning the unauthorized credit card charges, but framed the narrative as if I'd arbitrarily decided to withdraw financial support out of jealousy. Her emotional display gained traction among some of her college peers, leading to a flood of critical comments headed my way. People who had no context beyond Emma's tearful account assumed I was deliberately causing her misery. Realizing how distorted the situation was becoming, I decided that my silence was no longer an option. Through my own social media account, I published a calm, fact-based explanation. I detailed how I discovered the unauthorized charge, my attempts to resolve it with my parents, and the bank's ultimate decision. I emphasized how I'd never agreed to fund such an expensive trip and pointed out that this was about respecting boundaries, not punishing my sister. Some relatives, especially those who knew my parents' history of financial overreach, offered private messages of support. They expressed relief that I'd finally drawn a line and acknowledged they'd seen similar behavior in the past. But others condemned me for publicly airing dirty laundry and branded me as too rigid, lacking the familial spirit that supposedly mandates unconditional sacrifice. With the situation spiraling, I knew I had to protect myself. I set all my financial accounts to the highest security levels, changed my passwords, and even switched banks for my primary checking. I also blocked or restricted social media access from my parents, ensuring they couldn't slip in more unauthorized transactions. It was a drastic step, but I felt I had no choice. Their insistence that I destroyed Emma's future only fueled their attempts to guilt-trip me. I needed distance to preserve my peace of mind. Ultimately, I made the painful decision to cut off contact. I refused calls and texts from my parents, asking mutual friends to stop passing along their messages. This wasn't a rash move. I'd spent countless sleepless nights agonizing over whether a relationship with them was salvageable. But as long as they continued to treat me like a walking bank account rather than a family member with legitimate boundaries, it felt impossible to move forward. The fallout was brutal, but for the first time in months, I felt a sense of control and a firm commitment to respecting my own well-being. The first few weeks after I cut off contact were a whirlwind of mixed emotions. On the one hand, I felt a sense of relief and empowerment. I finally had control over my own finances and personal space. Yet I couldn't escape the guilt and sadness over how fractured my family had become. At the urging of a close friend, I decided to begin therapy. I found a counselor experienced in family dynamics and quickly discovered how beneficial it was to unload my doubts, frustrations, and deep-seated resentments in a supportive setting. Through therapy, I began to see that my family's patterns of behavior ran deeper than just this incident with the credit card. I also learned, thanks to a candid conversation with my aunt, that my parents had engaged in similar financial oversteps before. She confided that years ago, they had borrowed money from another relative's college fund to pay off a mortgage shortfall without asking, causing a huge rift that eventually got swept under the rug. Hearing this felt both validating and heartbreaking. It confirmed my suspicion that what had happened to me was not an isolated case but part of a larger pattern. As I delved into my sessions, I realized I'd often played the role of the responsible peacemaker in the family, always smoothing things over, making excuses for their behavior, and avoiding confrontations. This time, however, I was determined to set boundaries. I didn't want to live in constant fear that they might manipulate or guilt-trip me again. My therapist helped me establish clear rules for future communication, reminding me that it was okay, necessary, even, to prioritize my own well-being. In a surprising turn of events, Emma reached out about a month after the blow-up. She sent a heartfelt email apologizing for her previous reaction. She admitted she'd been caught up in her own excitement and had never questioned the ethics of how the trip was funded. She also confessed that, upon reflection, she realized she'd often taken advantage of the fact that our parents favored her. Reading her apology was a strange relief. I could sense genuine remorse in her words. It wasn't just a rushed sorry to smooth things over. My parents, on the other hand, remained defensive, at least initially. They were largely uncooperative when extended family members suggested they see a counselor. But eventually, after enough pressure from relatives, and perhaps their own growing realization that they were losing me, they tentatively agreed to participate in a few family therapy sessions. During these sessions, it emerged that they'd been juggling various financial strains for quite some time, resorting to ill-advised measures to keep up appearances. Although they never fully admitted guilt, they did acknowledge they were stuck in a problematic cycle. Over the next couple of months, I kept my contact with Emma limited, but open to slow, steady healing. I told her that trust had to be rebuilt gradually. I wasn't going to pretend everything was fine overnight. She understood and seemed committed to repairing our bond. My parents, for their part, had ups and downs, but therapy provided at least a forum for them to face their actions more openly. Meanwhile, I began exploring new career opportunities. I enrolled in an online professional certification program to deepen my expertise in finance. Building my financial security had always been important, but now it felt vital. I also allowed myself to socialize more, venturing into the dating scene again without the constant stress of family drama looming over me. In each new step, I reminded myself that setting boundaries didn't mean I had to isolate from my family forever. It simply meant defining what I would and wouldn't accept, and sticking to it no matter what. A few months after the dust began to settle, my professional life took a turn for the better. I received an unexpected promotion at the finance firm where I'd been working, which came with a generous pay increase and new responsibilities. That added confidence helped me finally make the decision I'd been mulling over for years. I applied to a master's program in financial analytics located in a different state. The idea of relocating was daunting at first, but I couldn't shake the feeling that a new environment would give me the fresh start I needed. Preparing for grad school meant I had to reevaluate my priorities. For much of my life, I'd been caught in the cycle of family obligations and guilt, always second-guessing my own needs to accommodate everyone else's. Therapy taught me that protecting my boundaries didn't equal selfishness. It was self-preservation. Gradually, I started letting go of the remorse I felt for abandoning my parents. Instead, I reframed it as a necessary step to cultivate a healthier dynamic for us all in the long run. Around this time, I also met someone. Her name is Sabrina. We crossed paths through a mutual friend at a small gathering. At first, I was guarded, worried about how any partner might respond to the complicated family baggage I carry. But Sabrina surprised me by listening intently without rushing to judgment. She asked how I'd learned to set boundaries and was genuinely interested in my journey of self-discovery. For once, I didn't feel like I had to tiptoe around the subject of my family. She made it clear she respected my decisions and wanted to support me. It's early days, but that acceptance has been a breath of fresh air. On the family front, the therapy sessions continued, albeit sporadically. My parents, now that they felt the very real possibility of losing me entirely, became more transparent about their situation. They admitted to long-standing debts and poor money management, issues they'd been hiding under a facade of stability. While they still struggle to take full responsibility, the sessions at least provide a forum for all of us to speak openly. It's not perfect, and I keep my guard up, but there's a tangible shift in how we approach each other. We're finding a middle ground where we can discuss tough topics without dismissing or shaming one another. As for Emma, she seems genuinely committed to making amends. She's taken on more hours at her job and even moved into a more modest apartment, determined to handle her own bills without begging for help. When we speak, our conversations feel more balanced. I no longer sense that underlying expectation for me to swoop in and fix everything. She still apologizes occasionally for how the graduation trip ordeal played out, and I remind her that trust building takes time. We haven't snapped back to an easy sibling bond, but we're headed in a healthier direction. Reflecting on it all, I see a version of myself that's grown immeasurably over the past year. Where I once would have caved to guilt or familial pressure, I now hold firm to my values. I've come to understand that family, in the truest sense, is built on mutual respect, empathy, and genuine care, not on coerced financial obligations or guilt trips. While the pain of betrayal hasn't vanished entirely, it has evolved into resolve. I'm determined to maintain the boundaries that protect my well-being, even as I offer cautious openings for reconciliation. At this point, I feel a renewed sense of purpose. I'm about to start a master's program in a new city with a supportive partner by my side, and a newfound confidence in my own emotional resilience. Although the situation with my parents remains complicated, I feel hopeful about the future. I've learned that love within a family means valuing each other's autonomy and never twisting that love into an excuse for exploitation. It's a lesson that came at a steep cost, but one I'll carry with me, stronger and wiser than before.